I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share the work that we're doing and bringing this story down to the ground level here in the Green-Duwamish watershed in Seattle, and talk a little bit about not only what we're doing it, but how we're doing it through this kind of table that we've convened with the support of the Urban Waters Federal Partnership. And what I want to start by giving you some of the context for what we are doing, and I'm going to use this photo here. Imagine that you're sitting in this bench and that you're looking toward the east, and what you're looking at is a Boeing facility that has been participating in a big reclamation and recovery of the water and the sediments at the bottom of the river, and at the same time engaging in a big restoration project. And if you're sitting in that bench, you're sitting on the other side of the river in one of the most diverse and disadvantaged communities in Seattle, and it's one of the only river access points. And so it speaks to a number of the things that both Surabhi and Sarah have talked about in terms of some of those common themes that are across all of the urban water sites, and that's is giving people an opportunity to connect to their waterways. So let me just give you a few additional sort of geographic contexts for the work that we're doing here, and talk a little bit about the organizations that are involved. The Green-Duwamish watershed is about 93 miles in length, and the origin is in a national forest, Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest. The water traverses over a dam, and it runs through a very suburban and agricultural area in the middle part of the river, and then it drains into the Duwamish Estuary, Seattle's only river, as it runs out through the port of Seattle and into Puget Sound. So it's an incredibly altered system, and importantly, it's a very active fish-bearing river and passage for a number of salmon species, including a few listed on the endangered species list. And the work is being, as it's been described by both Surabhi and Sarah, as one of the 19 sites. We are being driven and led by the Forest Service, originally through the PNW Research Station, coming to the table, finding that this watershed has a lot of interesting reasons to have it designated as an Urban Waters Partnership site. And now recently State and Private Forestry has come to join the work of the research team. And we've always been working in partnership with US EPA and the NRCS, given, again, the complexities of the work that happens across the watershed. So talking a little bit about some of the goals, I like to talk about it as this is a national, Urban Waters is a national initiative, but with really strong local roots, and that's certainly true here in the Green-Duwamish. Strong desire to connect people with and the recovery efforts of the water with those local needs. Do that in a really collaborative cross-partnership, cross-agency through that lens, getting people out into their communities and connected to the water, and focusing on where there aren't connections, how can we bring those into any of the work that goes forward, focusing on those social equity and environmental justice challenges and opportunities, and all the while using it as a means of economic development and job creation. And then, so how is this work happening? I was really struck by when Surabhi was describing the work of the partnership. And I don't know if Surabhi thinks of it this way, but I think of this Urban Waters Partnership Program as a collective impact model, and it's different across any of these sites, and it's certainly different here in Seattle. But again, we're leveraging existing multi-stakeholder initiatives. These partnerships have been created in the midst of already very complex in working environments where there are a lot of groups already working. And so we come into this with a shared goal of addressing complex social and environmental. And we do that by connecting across many organizations that share similar goals. We're trying to do that by establishing and using common metrics. We all are really committed to sharing information. And really importantly, there's typically one person like myself as the ambassador of this partnership that's responsible for making all of those connections, understanding the landscape of what's happening here, and finding those opportunities to better connect the work of the Urban Waters Partnership at the local level. And that's, I think, one of the really critical things that I've learned and we've all learned at the national partnership level, is that the importance of that backbone support through an ambassador or a coordinator position. So how does that actually play out here in the Green-Duwamish? We are, as we've started, working through existing multi-stakeholder initiatives, and we started that way having pulled together the federal family and a few of our key environmental groups when we first were entertaining the idea of a designation under the Urban Waters Program. And what we heard from that group was that sounds like a really interesting initiative and opportunity, but please, when you're structuring it, don't structure it as a new stakeholder collaborative where you're going to bring us together on a regular basis so we can share information with one another. Bring us together around real projects or real opportunities where we can bring our expertise to the table. And we also heard very, very distinctly from both EPA, but mostly from the communities that, and while you're doing that, you might want to stay away from the Superfund work because it's already a very active body of organizations and players that are engaged in bringing that work to the plan. So it's probably a good idea not to plug yourself into that in any significant way. And so we really took all of that advice to heart, and our little sieve there on the right-hand side, sort of, we call that opportunity triage. And so how we figured out the best ways of bringing the urban waters collaboration component to the table is I, as the ambassador and coordinator, kind of came down to local groups, identified which local groups were doing the majority of the work in the watershed, and I started going to their meetings, and I started learning what it is they do, who they work with in doing that, with what kind of resources, and where their real gaps and opportunities were. So that's the triage part of what we've been doing over the last couple of years. And we've come out of it with a couple of kind of key focal points for how we are operationalizing the work. One is that we're focused on a couple of groups. One of the groups has already been a recipient of Urban Waters small grants from US EPA, and we've been partnering with that organization, and they're a very key organization in the lower part of the Duwamish River. And so we've been focusing our attention and efforts and resources when we have them on their work so that they can continue what they're doing and even expand what it is that they're doing. We're working really closely with the groups, one key group in particular that's focused on watershed recovery. That's both from the water quality side, but largely from the restoration side. And it's been really clear that a lot of this is focused around the Forest Service research work that's at that nexus of nature and health. So as we're looking at restoration activities and the work that's been going on the ground, figuring out what are the multiple benefits that we want to be able to tell about those restoration investments, and particularly what are the human health benefits that come from that. And that's especially important in those lower Duwamish communities that have been historic environmental justice communities where the research shows that there are not as many natural resources, so not as many trees, not as much greenery. And by installing those for whether it's stormwater management, what are the other benefits that we want to make sure we're paying attention to? Where can we create those opportunities to connect people, give them access to, help them design access into restoration sites so that community members can have access to the river. So that's another major theme of how the work is unfolding here. And this is built on historical work that the Forest Service PNW research team has led through an entity called the Green Cities Research Alliance, another one of these big collaborative research efforts that brought the lens of sustainability and activating science and policy and civic engagement through this big collaboration. And that yielded a number of connections bringing traditional Forest Service tools into the City of Seattle and King County's work through, for example, stewardship mapping. And the iTree tool was used by the City of Seattle and the Parks Department, and the Forest Landscape Assessment tool in King County Parks Department. So it brought in that opportunity to bring in traditional Forest Service tools and capacity and make advances in management and future plantings in those parks areas. And so I want to shift gears a little bit to talk about some of the specific things that we've done since we launched in about 2013, and two projects in particular from this list. The first one is called Regreen the Green, and I know at the end one of the resources that I provided was a video that talks about this work and how important it is. And how the partnership has engaged in this effort is that we jump-started a working group with a little bit of funding, and I participate on the working group to develop a strategy for where trees are most needed along the middle Green River. It's an area that has a lot of agricultural land, it has a lot of levees and armoring, and it's also an area where temperatures have been spiking over the past number of years, which is causing spike in juvenile salmon mortality. And so it's designated as a critical area for reforestation, and they needed a strategy for how best to do that. And so we've been working over the past year to develop that strategy and bring in Forest Service capacity for where those trees most desperately need to go. And then I'll focus on probably one of the projects that we're most proud of, and we talk about with a lot of enthusiasm, and that is with end-of-the-year dollars, we met a really key community need in helping fund the launch of the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps. And this was a project that had been designed, and they were just waiting for funding. And we found that funding, and the community was able to launch this Youth Corps in 2014, focused on developing leadership capacity among their youth from within their own communities and getting them involved in civic life of the community. And since 2014's launch, as of spring of this year, they've graduated some 70 youth from that program through 5 different cohorts, and they're engaged in activities such as tree planting, and they've managed to plant 250 trees in very highly urbanized neighborhoods of South Park and Georgetown, where trees are really desperately needed. And they've been working on installing rain gardens and doing trail maintenance and invasive species removal and trash cleanup. And they've also, because of where these communities are located in the lower Duwamish waterway, air quality is a challenge, and so they've also been working with residents to install air quality filters in homes to help improve the indoor air quality. And I want to particularly point out the what I call the blue sky photo here, and that is the kids in the blue T-shirts are graduates of the Duwamish Valley Youth Corps, and they're with kids from many of you may be familiar with the Every Kid in a Park program. And I think this goes to something Sarah talked about, in that one of the themes is this leveraging of resources. And one of the things that I talked about is that focusing on key organizations that provide multiple programs and leverage those dollars. So the Duwamish River Cleanup Coalition, that is responsible for launching the Youth Corps, they also received funding through the Forest Service to go to an Every Kid in the Park initiative in one of the local elementary schools. And if you're not familiar, that's focused on 4th graders and trying to build in opportunities to get kids out into nature and out into parks. And I think while the real focus is on getting them out into the national parks, we've also kind of focused on the way in which they can be involved and outdoors in their more local parks, and that's how this Youth Corps has been engaged with this Every Kid in a Park cohort from this local elementary school. And they've been working They've taken boat trips together. They do work sessions together. So the younger kids are learning from the older kids, and it's just a really dynamic program that we expect that will continue to be funded in 2017. So with that, I'll wrap up by just sharing a little insights in the few years that we've been at this work. Recognizing John Muir's quote is really come to my attention and how all this unfolds. That it's certainly, we work with the salmon recovery folks, we work with tree planting, we work with habitat restoration, and it really is all about the people and the place and the economy, and it's all really interconnected. And couldn't help but leave you with an iconic shot of Seattle through the look of the trees. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dana.